The story that I want to tell is basically how we got here, how we became human. And so that story begins about 6 or 7 million years ago when our ancestors left the rainforest. And so the question is, why would they leave and how would they survive once they left? And that's what the social leap is. So it takes a second to get it all out there, okay?
Yeah.
All right. So here's the story. So if you look back about 7 million years, our ancestors and chimps, we had a common ancestor at about that point in time, 6 or 7 million years ago. And that common ancestor, we don't know exactly what it looked like, but it was, from all we can tell, it was awfully close to today's chimps. And so if you look at chimps today, you can get a pretty good sense of what life was like then. And chimps today are really interesting. They're basically at the top of the food chain in the rainforest. They're super fast up in the trees, super athletic, and because they travel in groups, even amazing tree climbers like leopards won't try to attack them in trees. It's just they're too dangerous, too fast. But if you look at a chimp on the ground, it can't even lock its knees. It's this kind of cute little stumbling along thing. And then the question is, why would an animal that runs a show in the canopy leave the rainforest for the savanna, and then how would it survive once it did that? And that's the story of this book, and then how that manifests itself to where we are today. So really my goal, I'm a psychologist, I want to understand why we are the way we are. And so in trying to figure that out, I said, well, let's take a look back all the way to our common ancestors and see some of the key events and how they might have had an influence on how we are today. So the first question is, why would we leave the trees, right? Here we are, we're dominant position, we're food on the ground. Why would we ever take that risk? And the basic story there is the Great African Rift Valley. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it at all, but basically it runs down from up at the Red Sea down to the coast of Mozambique. And you can think of it like a geographic zipper. You know, all the world sits on these tectonic plates, and sometimes they crash into each other, like how India is smashing into Asia and creates the Himalayas. Sometimes they literally tear apart. And Africa's tearing apart at the Great African Rift Valley. So that plate that has Somalia and Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, that's moving off to the lower right. The rest of Africa's moving off to the upper left. And I got no idea why. It's been going on for quite a while. But one of the consequences of that is that the East Africa is starting to rise up slowly, bit by bit. And when it rises up, the rainforests dry out. And so basically what you have is a situation where our ancestors were on the east side of that Rift Valley, and it started to dry out. And now they're in a situation where they've got this great lifestyle, they're a dominant position, but now they're forced out onto the ground increasingly more and more because there's more and more ground and less rainforest. And so how do they survive that? What do they do in order to make that work?
And this is what period of time is this? How many millions of years ago?
6 or 7.
6 or 7. Does this coincide with when was the jump of the human brain size where it doubled?
Oh, we'll get to that. So it's a super interesting question about why that happened as well. So basically, if you track us across the next 3 million years, how did our ancestors survive when they're basically chimpanzees on the open savanna? And you can get a hint of how they did it because there's one chimpanzee group that does live on the savanna in Senegal, and they show some differences between themselves and other chimps. They travel in slightly larger groups. They share more nicely with each other, which is interesting. That's kind of a human trait as well. And they also avoid open space. Like they're just kind of trying to stay near the trees as much as possible. And so, and if you look at other other primates that are on the savanna, like savanna baboons, they're only monkeys, so they're not as sharp as chimpanzees are, but they have a similar strategy, large groups to try to protect themselves and lots of eyes to look out for predators. And they do fine on the savanna. And so what I suspect happened is for the first few million years, basically what you've got is this chimp-like animal that's kind of skirting the edges of the savanna, nowhere near the top dominant position they used to be, and just kind of noodling around. And I suspect that takes us for about the first 3.5 million years. And if you look at who we are then, we're Australopithecus afarensis. So if you looked at one of them, you'd think it belongs in a zoo. It looks almost like a chimpanzee. And so a chimp brain, in answer to the first part of your question, is about 380 grams. An Australopithecus brain is about 450 grams. So 3 million years of evolution, and all we've got for it is 70 grams. So why do we get so smart? Why do we take off in the next few million years? And what is it that Australopithecus did that helped us survive? And why do I call that the social leap? That's all kind of tied together. And the basic story is that by this point, Australopithecus has become bipedal. And we can talk about how that happened if you'd like. And so because they're bipedal, their waist is now stretched out. Their musculature, like if you look at chimpanzee pecs, they aim upward because, of course, chimps climb all the time. Australopithecus is more lateral, like we are. We're basically completely lateral because things are side to side as far as we're concerned. It's harder to climb a tree, but it's a whole lot easier to do a lot of other things. And we have much more limber shoulder. We have much more limber wrist, all that sort of thing. And a lot of that was in place by Australopithecus. So once they became bipedal, they gained a lot of these qualities. And then the question is, why do those qualities matter? Well, if you watch a chimpanzee throw, it's terrible at it. Even though they're stronger than you and I are pound for pound by a sizable margin, when they throw, they're inept, they can't aim very well, and they typically use two hands because they're not lined up well to throw. If you watch a really good thrower, like a gridiron, a football player, a baseball player, or hunter-gatherer throw, it's a full body motion. You step forward with the other leg, there's this rotation, in the very last minute you bring your wrist through. Well, what that does is it creates an enormous amount of elastic energy across your muscles, tendons, and ligaments. And the end of that throw for a human is like the snapping of a rubber band. So chimps can't do that. They're not lined up properly. But Australopithecus got to the point where they could probably do that pretty well. And so now, and that's purely a byproduct of bipedalism because it stretched out their whole body and they're not climbing as much anymore, so their musculature is more lateral, which would have been helped them for throwing. So now you get to a point where they have access to the single most important military invention in history, which is the capacity to kill at a distance. So if you and I are running around the savannah and a lion attacks us and we got 50 of our best friends, we could kill it with our bare hands, but a lot of us are going to die in the process, right? Because
you think 50 of us could kill a lion?
Let's make it 100.
You think even 100 of us could kill a lion?
It would, with a bunch of knives and shit.
If I was a lion, I'd be super confident.
Yeah, you wouldn't worry.
Other people.
You wouldn't worry very much, but even if we could, so we knew what we're doing, we're all armed with knives. Whoever goes in first is screwed.
Right.
And so the capacity to kill at a distance, though, allows a larger force of weaker individuals to easily defeat a stronger individual. Right. And so once they gain this capacity to throw, if they were attacked by lions or something like that, whereas in the past they'd have just scattered for the trees, now they could throw stones at it and defend themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, an Australopithecus throwing rocks at a lion is going to be in the belly of a slightly annoyed lion in about 3 minutes, right?
Right.
But 50 Australopithecines throwing rocks at lions is a totally different story. And so the idea here is the throwing hypothesis, that what changed everything was throwing. And the reason it changed everything is that it caused us, it was the first reason why we should have any effective collective action. Because it's not a good strategy when you're on your own. It's not a good strategy if I do it and the rest of the group heads for the trees, but it's a great strategy if we all do it together. And so for the first time in history, the group's goals, in our history, in our line, the primate line, the group's goals aligned with the individual goals, which is let's cooperate and work together to try to drive away these predators.